Okay. Um, so, you know, I'm running off of very little sleep, but because I just got off my guard shift, and that's 24 hours. But even though I just got off my guard shift and that's 24 hours and all this stuff, I have some important thoughts that I have to get out before they go into the void, before it disperses itself into this nothingness, right? So I say this a lot, right, with a lot of my human relationships philosophy. Hi, Will. How you doing? Um, so I've been saying this a lot about my human relationship philosophy, right? This idea of protecting difference. But something has recently become a concern to me about what does that actually mean? What does protecting difference actually mean? Um, and I was reading some of Rilke today, which is going to be the reason for the thumbnail of this video. It's going to be a picture of Rilke himself. I was reading through Rilke, and Rilke said something very interesting to me that I didn't think about when I kept alluding to this idea of protecting difference. And so this very subtle distinction that I want to make is this. There's difference, and then there's difference that is constructed through convention. Another way to phrase that would be difference made through social uh, construction, social convention, the customs, and so on. It actually reminds me of something similar about what Cadell had said to me, um, which I agree, because it's also a very Hegelian way to approach it, right? If everybody's different, then everybody's the same, right? And we can look at the social convention of difference, where it's like, yeah, be yourself, be unique, be different. See, um, and I thought about this more, about the way the culture is going. And I thought, it's not enough to say this, to say protect difference, because what it could mean, and I think my talk with Samuel Barnes helped elucidate this further, is that what it could mean is to protect your hyper individualism, you know? But the thing is, the concept of hyper individualism is itself a social convention. So this is what I'm saying, and this is what becomes actually the real concern. And I don't always mean to mystify human relationships, but in this case, now I'm going to mystify it, because this idea of protecting difference, whatever concept you think is difference, I don't think we actually know what real difference is. I would say a lot of what we believe to be our differences with each other are in fact mere social conventions. And this is what is helping me realize, from Rilke, is that we have mere social conventions that are differences. And so then what is Rilke proposing in this? Well, Rilke is proposing this idea of solitude, right? That you need to have some type of solitude away from social convention, some type of way that you ripen in yourself, whatever that means. Because I don't even know what that means, but only the poets can explain this, right? This is where philosophy gets hazy. This is where sometimes I feel like actually I can't even talk philosophy in this case, because I have to go into poetry. I have to go into the ontological difference is a mystery. Yes, Thomas Jockin is right. I have to go in this way. And speaking of Heidegger, of ontological difference, there's actually a reason why Heidegger himself kind of leans towards poetry in the end, right? He starts talking more about poetry and the poets. But so when I talk about difference, I thought, okay, if you're in a relationship with somebody, is protecting difference like this, like, oh, um, I like Marvel movies and she likes, I don't know, murder mysteries, right? But we don't like those same things. But we come to some understanding, and is that protecting difference? Is that real difference? I mean, and that's what I was really thinking about. Is that real difference at all? Um, it is, the way, for example, let's say I don't wear matching socks, right? And she prefers me to be orderly. Is that real difference? Let me see. Will says the usual differences, quote quote, are simply ways to feed narcissistic and egotistic tendencies. Yes, and I think that's why I alluded to the fact that I believe a lot of people's quote quote differences is just another form or guise for their hyper individualism. That it isn't really a difference. It's just like this way to assert your your false hyper individualism. Um, but the thing is, how do you the real question, right, is how. So then this for me is artificial difference, in my opinion. It's artificial difference because it's predicated on this sort of hyper individualism. So how do you cultivate a difference that is less artificial? And the only poet that alludes to this is when Rilke says you need to have solitude work on you. And this is the best way I can phrase it because I don't know how to philosophically phrase this. You need to have solitude work on you. But there is like this little bit of phenomenological experience going on because Rilke does talk a lot about being patient, um, and just sort of just being there with the things that arise in you. Um, and it's funny because even in Hegel, right, when you read Hegel, phenomenology is really just a description of things as we see them, as they rise. But it's funny because like I never thought about patience, like being patient, learning to cultivate patience is actually the human relation, the almost like the human equivalent embodiment trait to what phenomenology is. I almost feel like, right, like phenomenology, you could say, we mainly go for the description of what reveals itself, right, what is revealing to itself. But a man that is cultivating patience, he is doing essentially the same thing, right? Because a man that is not patient, he is not willing to wait for the thing to reveal itself. He's being too hasty, he's being too greedy, he's being maybe even narcissistic. And then so when Rilke says solitude has to work upon us, we can even use theological terms because it's like something is already crafting us in this moment. And it actually made me think about all the poets that I read, all the poets that I read, and how honestly, when they talk about things and human relationships, it always sounds so porous. That I hope that makes sense, porous, because when I study myself, I go through a wide variety of emotions and states and everything. But not only do I go through a multitude of states and emotions, that things also pour into me just as much as I pour just as much as things pour out of me. And I thought about, it's so funny how like how porous we really are, you know, how I can talk here and I can make you feel something over there on that other side of that screen. Like we're already just having this porous experience with each other. But then that also alludes to a danger too, and that's why I think Rilke talks about that. You need to have the solitude first do its porousness with you, do its shaping with you, because he does talk about in one of his letters to a young poet. He talks about this. He says, when we love somebody, what ends up happening is that when we're not ripe, when we're not ripe in it, we get so messy with each other. And he said a very good line. He said a very good line, which I can attest to my own experience. He says it becomes so messy that you can't even discern your own outlines, right? You can't even discern your own outlines, whatever that means. And yet, for some reason, I understood what it meant, you know? Because it's like we're so immersed in the love, it's like we can't even discern like anything. And then of course, the funny thing about love is as well is that culturally, a lot of our notions about love is deeply ingrained in convention. And then advice gets passed down like convention after convention. So, that's why I raise this idea that when I say protecting difference, it almost feels like I'm wronging people now, because it's like you can easily interpret this as like, I'm going to protect my hyper individualism, I'm going to, but when I say protect difference, it's always protecting the other's difference, really. But I feel like we also need to understand what is truly our difference. What is truly my difference? And I don't think what is truly my difference to say to you, well, my difference is that I love philosophy and you don't. Or that I read poetry and you don't. Or that I wake in the morning and I pray. I don't think those are the differences that are necessarily, because one, there's many people that pray in the morning. One, there's many people that watch Marvel movies. Two, there's many people that read philosophy. So, but what is that real, pure, unsayable difference? That is the mystery. And it's funny because you can only ever feel that difference. And sometimes it's not even in the words. And I'm mainly speaking for myself, from my own experience, that when I really experience difference with somebody, it's not even about what they're saying. It's not about what they're saying. It's about this tension between you and I. This real difference. And we can always say, oh, it's because. I think when we try to rationalize the difference, that's maybe where we even go wrong. But I think I will stop there, because this is still something that I'm working through thinking, and I'll read some comments here from Will. He says, difference between brotherly, familial, unconditional love, agape, eros. In my own philosophy and experience of mysticism, my difference is just my own way of expressing that which is the same between us, and it's the force of divine love. The difference is the channel. Difference is not a product, but the means of acquiring it. Yeah, I mean, well, there is many ways. Like, there's many ways to look at difference, and that is also what is interesting. Like Kojev, for example, Kojev says difference is man's constant, like essential capacity to basically have negativity, right? Anything that involves negativity is basically the essence of man. If man did not exist, there would be no negativity. So that means everything would be self-identical, right? This is how Kojev looks at it through his reading of Hegel. Um, and and I understand what you're saying, Will, from here. That I mean, the difference itself, in a very Hegelian way, when you encounter a difference, it is always for you. It is always for you, and so when it is always for you, it is technically always for the same. It is for the same. But for tangible experiences, for people to actually have this relationship, um, because I think about this, right? When we have a relationship with somebody, most of the time they don't read philosophy. They're not going to read poetry. Maybe they're not even religious. Maybe uh, they're not any of those things. It's like, what do we do then? And I think I had raised this conversation before with Samuel Barnes about, I was like, speaking of differences, right? One of the most contested differences is like religious differences, right? Like something my mother always said was, you probably can't really marry outside your faith because uh, even if you do marry outside your faith, the problem is one of you is going to deeply disagree about how those children should be raised and what faith those children should be raised in. Um, but actually, I believe recently got a comment by somebody, James, if you're there. I hope you do eventually watch this. But James actually said that he's married. He's married to a Catholic woman, and they have children. And he expressed that it worked out fine. Um, so obviously, it's not all going to go to shams. And not all is lost, but there's something there that James and this woman have. I mean, we could reduce it to just understanding, but I want to say that doesn't really help people half the time to be understanding. You know, I feel like we could always say that to so many. We could always say that about so many things. Like, someone's angry, like, oh, just be understanding. Just just be understanding. It's not enough to just say be understanding. Um, but okay, Jochen. I'm sitting with the question: is quote one, the passion unto being as Occam states, or is one equivalent to being as Plato states, or one many modes of being like Aristotle states? One, the passion unto being, as Occam says. I haven't heard the first one. Plato and Aristotle, I've dabbled with a little bit. But Spinoza does the same thing with being, where being has all these modes. And actually, Sufism has the same thing too. Well, actually, no. Ibn Arabi, which you're in the book club, Jockin, so you'll figure it out. All the names are basically modes of being of the big B, God. All the attributes of God, like all the names of God, are attributes of God. But they are, I think, for Ibn Arabi, they are hierarchical. If that's the way to phrase it. So I mean, but so how does this how would you even okay? So taking all those questions, Jockin, how would you put this in a tangible relationship? Whether it be Occam's, Plato's, or Aristotle's, how would you? Actually, I feel like that's a very cruel question to ask, because I feel like we would actually have to have a conversation with this like face to face, because yeah, actually, you know what? I think we should save it for that. Because then it does root back to the one and the many, right? But I feel like it also roots back to some of my original ideas of absolute solitude. Well, no doubt, Occam line is from the Summa Logica. Oh, is that Summa Logica? Isn't that from what's that thinker? Plato for the win. Oh, okay, yeah, absolute solitude. So, good example here. So, I may not know exactly what I'm saying about protecting difference, but there are allusions to it in sentences, right? For example, Henry Corbin's book title on Ibn Arabi is called "Alone with the Alone." Alone with the alone. That's really what I'm trying to express about what it means to protect difference. Alone with the alone. I can't add more to that, because philosophically I haven't been able to explain it. It's actually very difficult to explain alone with the alone. Rilke says the same thing. When you read his letters, he says fundamentally we are alone, which is totally the counter to it's the complete counter to normal convention of thinking. Like he says, we're alone. Fundamentally, we are alone. But for me, the way you can interpret this theologically is there is only God. There is only one God. That means that's it. Fundamentally alone, right? And of course, when mysticism takes the idea of that there's only one God, then that's it. There is literally nothing else. Everything is basically just like a mode of it, mode of the same thing. Alone with the alone. Or like the way Meister Eckhart says it. The same eye through which God sees me is the eye through which I see him. Yeah, something like that. Ibn Arabi says the same thing too, along the same lines. And Rumi also has a poem where it says, actually, I could read it right now. I could read it right now. Hold on, guys. Where did I put that book, actually? I could read it right now. I could read it right now. Here's straight quotes from Rumi. When you are with everyone but me, you are with no one. When you are with no one but me, you're with everyone, alone with the alone. And this is why I tell people to read poetry. The Kabbalist said the same thing. Yeah, that's something that I've also been very interested in as well. But again, what's funny is like even in the Quran, right? When it says God is closer to you in your jugular vein, closer to you than your own jugular vein. For me, that also represents the same thing, alone with the alone. But I think, I didn't expect myself to be able to dissect this philosophically and be able to apply it to real tangible relationships. But, it's like I said, like Rilke says, let the solitude work on you. And I think maybe then we can encounter what is being said. And of course, when you said solitude, let solitude work on you, there's so many ways to interpret that. You can apply it theologically. Let God work on you. That is what I would say. That's in the theological way. That's the sincere way of solitude working on you without the interference of convention. And I think too many people fear the idea of being alone, that you can never let solitude work on you, essentially. So go crazy, huh? Divine madness is the most sane we will ever be. Oh, Will, you're so funny. All right. I think that's enough. I'm very tired. I just got off from my shift. I just wanted to get out that idea that, to make that subtle distinction between a difference of convention and encountering perhaps what is real difference, and not some type of feeding of hyper individualist notions. So anyways, thank you guys for watching. I always appreciate it. And Jockin, we can always talk about that, you and me, on your question, because I do feel like I caught myself asking it, and I was like, oh, that's so rude. We really have to sit down and talk about this. And of course, I'd want you to explain some things and everything. Okay, thank you guys for watching so much. And you guys take care. All right, bye.